So after this recent Super Bowl that I kind of predicted horribly wrong, it affects a lot of all-time discussions because it does affect Patrick Mahomes' legacy. I'm not going to be outrageous and say he can't possibly ever be the GOAT, or that this is too big of a black mark and it just completely throws his trajectory off, because if we're still being honest and keeping it Patrick Mahomes at the age of 29 has a better resume than Tom Brady at the age of 29. For the people acting like this completely invalidates his GOAT argument, Tom Brady on an 18-0 team put up 14 points against the number 16 defense in the league in the Super Bowl. Like, if we had social media back then, y'all would be grilling it. But that's the end of that discussion. But basically, where my mind was at is, who's the greatest Super Bowl quarterbacks of all time? But with that being said, let's get into this list. This is Zaza Sports. Welcome to my videos. If you haven't been here before, like, subscribe, and by the way, I've been forgetting to say this in the videos, drop your hot takes in the comments. I want to make a hot take video. But let's get into the top 5. Coming in at number 5, Roger Staubach. Probably the best quarterback of the 1970s, the greatest Dallas Cowboys quarterback of all time, a 2-time Super Bowl champion, and the 5th greatest Super Bowl performer ever at his position. In Roger Staubach's 4 Super Bowl appearances, he went 2-2, but the difference between Roger Staubach and other quarterbacks that might have a higher ring total or the same amount is, he played in one of the hardest eras in league history. Defenses were molesting people on the field. He played against several dynasties or semi-dynasties in the Miami Dolphins, who were back-to-back Super Bowl champions in this decade and having the only undefeated team of all time. He beat them in his first Super Bowl, throwing 119 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions on 115 passer rating, and then playing the dynasty of the 1970s in the Pittsburgh Steelers that drafted 5 Hall of Famers in one draft in Mike Webster, Jack Lambert, Lynn Swann, John Stallworth, and then undrafted Donnie Shell. And he would have some legendary games in the Super Bowl against them. As you see in his second Super Bowl, he threw for 204 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions on a 77.8 passer rating and losing in a classic 21-17. But in his third Super Bowl, he would play the Denver Broncos and win his second ring and win his final ring, throwing for 183 yards, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions, and 102.6 passer rating. In his final Super Bowl, Staubach would lose against the Pittsburgh Steelers again, never getting the better of them in any of the Super Bowls. And another classic where he had his best Super Bowl performance, throwing 228 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. But with all this being said, Roger Staubach's my 5th greatest Super Bowl performer at his position. Number 4, Staubach's greatest rival, Terry Bradshaw. I'm not saying Bradshaw was a better quarterback than Staubach. You might know him for being an announcer before every football game, but back in the day, he was an elite quarterback, winning 4 Super Bowls in 4 tries, having a perfect record of 4-0. In his first Super Bowl, he would play the Minnesota Vikings, where he'd only throw 96 yards, 1 touchdown to 0 interceptions on 108 passer rating. Only the Vikings would lose to that kind of Super Bowl performance. But in Terry Bradshaw's second Super Bowl, he would play the Dallas Cowboys, where he would throw 209 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions on 122.5 passer rating and winning his second Super Bowl overall. But in his third Super Bowl, he would spin the block on the Dallas Cowboys again, being absolute nightmare fuel for him, where he'd throw for a legendary 318 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 interception. One of the most underrated Super Bowl performances of all time, to win a nail-biter 35-31. So NFL fans, this man you can thank for the Cowboys not having 7 rings. But in his final Super Bowl against the LA Rams, Terry Bradshaw would have his arguably worst performance in the big game, throwing for 309 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions on 101.9 passer rating, but still winning the game. Terry Bradshaw, with those 4 Super Bowls, he'll be placed at number 4 on my list for greatest Super Bowl performers at his position. Let's get into the top 3. Now, this is very controversial to me personally, because once we get into these top 2 on a per throw basis, you could argue number 2 could be above number 1. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get into number 3. Patrick Mahomes. He's had a 7-year career, going to 5 Super Bowls, having the 3rd most touchdown passes in the big game, having the 3rd most Super Bowl rings, and tying for 2nd for most Super Bowl MVPs. The only thing really holding him back from the top 2 is he hasn't even played a decade in the league and the number of rings he has. But in Patrick Mahomes' first Super Bowl, he would throw for 286 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, winning Super Bowl MVP and giving the Chiefs their first Super Bowl in 50 years. But in his second Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes would throw for 270 yards, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and would lose to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Oh, I wonder where this guy's going to be ranked. But in his third Super Bowl, he would arguably have his finest outing, throwing for 182 yards, 3 touchdowns to 0 interceptions, and winning his second Lombardi. In the year after, he would return for his 4th Super Bowl in 6 years and would throw for 333 253 yards, 2 touchdowns to 1 interception, leading a game-winning overtime drive to win his 3rd ring in this recent Super Bowl. Boy, did they get dog walked. But Patrick Mahomes' stats were 257 yards, 3 touchdowns to 2 interceptions in an abysmal Chiefs loss. But on to the top 2. Now, this is literally splitting hairs. I'm not saying a guy having less rings should be above number 1, but I'm saying it's damn near closer than y'all think, because on a per throw basis, Joe Montana is the greatest Super Bowl quarterback of all time. And honestly, I might make a Joe Montana video. He gets way too much disrespect because he would go 4-0, throw 0 interceptions in the Super Bowl, and in the one Super Bowl he didn't win Super Bowl MVP in, he led a game-winning drive to win the game. On a per throw basis, no one will ever touch Joe Montana's 1,142 yards, 11 touchdowns, 0 picks, and 128 passer rating. Absolutely blistering. In Montana's first Super Bowl against Cincinnati, he threw for 157 yards, 1 touchdown, 0 interception on 100 passer rating. And then in his second Super Bowl against Miami, Joe Cool in 1984 would throw for 331 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions to win his second Super Bowl. Then in his third Super Bowl, he would throw for 357 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions on a 115.2 passer rating to win his third Super Bowl. And then to go back-to-back in his final Super Bowl appearance, he would throw for 297 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions on a 147.6 passer rating to win his 4th Super Bowl and going 4-0 in the process. Now, this is my dilemma. Going into this video, I was convinced Tom Brady's the greatest Super Bowl performer of all time. Joe Montana, throw for throw against Tom Brady, is the better quarterback in the Super Bowl. But when you add ring count, you get number 1, and that is Tom Brady. Like, subscribe. I love making this content. I love the recent support. Yo, y'all are blowing my shit up. I love it. And for real, I'll catch y'all in the next video. Drop some hot takes in the comments, and peace.